today we have Dan Lacovara.
Thank you.
Dan came here as an intern originally several years ago and was a clinical associate, had a big caseload, ran some groups, did work in our intensive program, our Skype coaching work, and just really dug into the work and was an amazing contribution to our team. He also studied at Antioch for his clinical psychology background. He also worked at the LGBT Center in Hollywood, and now is our clinical outreach specialist. So Dan has been making lots of appearances lately in the last 6 months, just random appearances, at a lot of training sites and graduate schools. And some of you may have seen him in some of those environments, and he'll be at CSUN tomorrow. So he's a wealth of knowledge on a variety of sexuality topics. Today is going to be gay men, the shame paradigm, and sex. So please welcome Dan Lacovara.
Thank you. Thank you, Douglas. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see everybody here. I'm looking forward to talking with you, hopefully not talking at you for the whole time, about something I've developed in collaboration with Alex called the shame paradigm as it relates to gay men to sex. You just heard all that. This is a word cloud. Some of you probably know what it is, but I call this the dark word cloud. What we're talking about today is the many ways in which gay men experience shame in their lives and how that shame affects their experience of sex and sexuality. I'm not talking about sex addiction specifically today. That can be an issue, obviously, but this is really about gay men's relationship to themselves, to the culture, and to sex and sexuality. I invite you to ask questions as we go. I'm going to try to do this in an hour. I think I can. You all are the second group I've presented to. I was at the Society for the Advancement of Sexual Health last month presenting on this topic. So it's always in progress and in process. So what your thoughts are, whether it's today or afterwards, you have my contact details will be up there, okay? So, all right. So again, this is pretty negative stuff. And these are all words that I've either heard used in relationship to me, to other gay men, people in conversation, and pretty powerful, right? We don't want these words said about anybody. So I was doing research for this. I found some really interesting photos. I'll just show them quickly of gay men. Really, this is the 1800s in the early 20th century. I call them hidden figures because you might see them in pictures, but you probably not see them out and about, arm in arm, sitting together, holding hands. Very much still, even in the 20th century, issues around shame, being in the shadows, right? We talk about coming out, but I often think of it as coming out of the shadows. That's my favorite one. They look so happy together. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the modern gay rights movement to give you some perspective on the pluses and the minuses. I'll do this fairly quickly. They're actually probably not in your slide presentation because I have all these fantastic pictures, but I'll talk through it for you. If any questions, we'll start there. Who knows who that is? Kinsey. That's Kinsey. Thank you, Greg. So this is 1948. Alfred Kinsey, great sexologist, I guess, was the first person. He published a book called Sexual Behavior in the Human Male and said that he found that homosexuality, was really gay men at that time, far more widespread than people thought. So that was the first time it was really introduced into the mainstream. This is the Mattachine Society. The Mattachine Society in the 1950s was the first gay men's group, liberation group, focusing on gay rights. This is the 50s in San Francisco, very early. Not to leave the women out, these are the daughters of Bilitis, or Bilitis, and she was a Greek goddess. So they've always been assigned, I love that, with the Greek goddess. So they were also another group that was working on lesbian rights. The twain never met, but at least there was something happening. Again, the gay rights movement started. This is in the 1960s. This was the first protest outside the Department of Defense about gays and lesbians not being able to serve in the military. And if you think about this, this is 57 years ago. And as we know, that issue didn't go away and is back on the table. So again, we're talking about progress and rollbacks, basically. Illinois was the first state to decriminalize sodomy. And sodomy is still illegal, I think, in 16 states. And again, that's not just homosexual sodomy, but heterosexual sodomy. So again, thinking about how we've evolved as a society sexually, there's still a lot of stuff that sort of is behind the curtain. This was an article in Time magazine. It says, "The Homosexual in America." And I have got to read this. This is one of the quotes from the article. The once widespread view that homosexuality is caused by heredity or by some derangement of hormones has been generally discarded. Sounds good, right? The consensus is that it is caused psychically through a disabling fear of the opposite sex. The origin of this fear lie in the homosexual's parents. The mother, either domineering and contemptuous of the father or feeling rejected by him, makes her son a substitute for her husband with a close binding overprotective relationship. Thus, she unconsciously demasculinizes him. Sound familiar? The old enmeshment with mom, rejection by dad. And again, that's 1966. Kind of a long time ago, but not really a long time ago in my mind. And who knows what this is? Stonewall. For those of you who don't know, this is 1969. The Stonewall riots really was the birth of the modern gay rights movement. Stonewall was a bar in New York. Drag queens, gay men, congregated there. Police used to raid lots of different bars, arresting gay men. And this is the time people fought back. And it really was. I mean, it was a riot. And that really that was the dawn of the modern gay rights movement. Pink Triangle. So the Pink Triangle was the early sign of sort of gay liberation, gay freedom, and I'll talk about where it came from. It was a reclaiming of a symbol that had very negative connotations. The DSM finally took homosexuality out of its list of disorders. Again, 1977. Harvey Milk was elected as the first city supervisor in San Francisco. Does everyone know what happened to Harvey Milk a little bit later? He was assassinated. Yeah, so he was the first public gay political figure in the country, and it was sort of a groundswell of joy all across the country that someone came out of the shadows to have such a leadership role. It's the first march on Washington, 75,000 people. Rainbow flag, the first rainbow flag was created, again, symbol of gay pride. Now I think they're trying to add some more colors based on different or groups within the gay community. I think it's tricky, but I hope we have as many colors as we need. So AIDS is defined as an epidemic. This is 1981. By 1989, they will have claimed that only 90,000 people died. I think that was very underreported. This was the epidemic. First gay games. So again, good stuff, not such good stuff. AMFAR, American Foundation for AIDS Research, was founded by Elizabeth Taylor, really in honor of Rock Hudson, who was her friend who came out publicly to talk about having AIDS. They've raised hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, which I guess would be in the billions, on research into protection and treatment. GLAAD, the Gay Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, which was an organization fighting negative stereotypes in the media. Stop Killing Us, Silence Equals Death. This is where ACT UP, which was a angry, powerful group of men and women who came together saying enough. The silence around AIDS, both from the government and from the mainstream community, is killing us. It was for those of us who grew up in the 80s, late 70s, and the early 90s, this was just sort of that radical movement that we'd been craving, saying enough is enough. Don't worry, we're getting there. We'll be talking content. That was 1993. It was a march on Washington. 1 million people attended. And what you see here is the AIDS quilt. And the AIDS quilt was, people would make panels, quilt panels for people who had died of AIDS. And they were beautiful. They were decorated with mementos and photographs. And this was the last time it was able to be shown. I want to make sure I have the number right. It had gotten too big to lay out. And this was laid out in DC all the way across the mall, if you think about the number there. That's 48,000 panels that people had put, and it was rolled out, and it's never been shown in its entirety again. And when I say that, I get goosebumps. 48. Then I had the opportunity to walk those panels, and it was the quietest I'd ever seen. And Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton came out and actually walked those panels too. That's when Don't Ask, Don't Tell. President Clinton signed, "You can serve in the military, just don't be gay," or "Don't let us know you're gay." That was really helpful for us. And who is this? Ellen DeGeneres. First time a major figure in entertainment came out, which was, I remember being in a bar. Okay, I've gone to bars, and in the 90s, and people were standing around the television waiting for her to say in that episode of Ellen, "I'm gay." It was you could hear, I grew up in DC, you could hear the cheers up and down 17th Street. It was pretty wonderful. unfortunately, this was another very dark part in our society. Matthew Shepard, a 19-year-old, was abducted by 3 heterosexual men, no offense to the heterosexuals, and was beaten and beaten and beaten and tied to this fence, left to die. And that was in 1998. That's not even 20 years ago. So we're talking about trauma here. We're going to be talking about trauma. 2000s, that's Vermont, civil unions. Free to marry in Boston, so in Massachusetts. We didn't have it across the country yet. Brokeback Mountain wins an Academy Award. Pretty cool. This is the marriage rallies all over the country about free, to be able to marry, legal marriage all across the United States. He repeals Don't Ask, Don't Tell. That's good old Obama. The Supreme Court decision to allow gays to marry all the way across the country, which is pretty fantastic. So anyone who's married here besides me, congratulations. Just took us a while. Where are we today? Who knows what this is? Pulse nightclub in, I want to make sure I have the date right, July 2016, 49 people killed, 48 wounded. And it was a gay bar, a gay club, targeted for the people who went there. Again, remember, that's last year. Anyone here is a Republican is fine, but Mike Pence is virulently anti-gay. He believes in conversion therapy. He wants to divert money from AIDS research and treatment into abstinence programs. Very dangerous in terms of how the gay community experiences itself. And again, that's going to play into what we talk about. Well, we did well for a while, but now the rollback on transgender rights, both in the military and the effort to sort of tell people they can't go to the bathroom of the sex they identified with. States are still fighting about it, so there's progress in certain places, but not everywhere. Transgendered are being told they can't serve in the military, though the military's fighting back, which is kind of cool. And gay bashing, hate crimes are up by about 11% in the gay community. And that's men, women, trans. I don't want to, I'm talking about gay men today because this is about gay men. I don't want people to think I'm not attentive to or concerned about the rest of the community. Just what I'm doing. Okay, shame. These are all feelings that generate a sense of shame, and I think there are probably a lot more of them. Secrecy is, in the word cloud, one of the biggest ones as I talk to people, having to live in secret. Literally secret to others, sometimes keeping secrets from ourselves about who we are. Toxic shame. What's toxic shame? It's the fundamental belief that we are flawed. State shame is, I do something and I'm really embarrassed about it and I turn red, right, or I start to shake. Toxic shame is deep down in myself, I have been told, I believe that, I operate under the assumption that I am fundamentally bad. For people who grow up gay, not everybody, but there is an inherent sense, and we'll talk about where this comes from, that we are not worthy, or there's something intrinsically wrong with us. And I'm not saying that every person who is gay grew up with toxic shame. But when we're dealing with clients, this is an issue we have to look at. How many people here are licensed? How many people here are not licensed? Good for you all. Keep going. Okay, so some of the, and unfortunately, we're going to talk about parents and children and adults and children, but when we're looking at toxic shame, that's usually we start to interpret it, experience it very early in our age, childhood. Does not mean that as a baby, our mother or father knows we're gay, but shame, as we become more conscious of it, we recognize what's being said to us, what's being communicated to us by parents, by siblings, by friends, and that negative message about sexuality can really, I keep doing this, because this is where it ends up. When we're 13 and 14, we can maybe start to intellectualize, oh, this is why people are saying this, but we're all just emotions and feelings, and that's what gets absorbed into our system, and I think goes right here to our core. So I sort of was, again, thinking about all the different ways we are shamed. I say we, because as a gay man, I'm going to also, involve myself in this. But as gay men are shamed, and I was thinking about this because it's not just one piece. Shame, toxic shame, sure, is the fundamental issue I think we need to work with when we're working with any client who has shame. But because of the unique experience of gay men in the world, it comes from lots of different places. So this is the paradigm. Cultural trauma can lead to shame. Complex trauma, stigmatization, and internalized homophobia, which leads to toxic shame. So if you want to think about this as things coming at you from all sides, or I'm in the middle here, you're getting it from everywhere. It's not just coming from one area. And I want to talk about each one of this. So for those of you who don't know, this is a photograph of gay men in a concentration camp. I want to give you the numbers on this because I think it's important. And the pink triangle, just as a Jewish star was used to mark Jews, the pink triangle was used to mark gay men. And I just want to give you the numbers. I think it's important to hear this. Let's see. I believe that a million gay men were identified in various countries as gay and to be labeled. They didn't all end up in concentration camps. About 100,000 gay men were interred, not in concentration camps, but in work camps. And they estimate, and I don't know how they estimate this, that 15,000 people, 15,000 men were killed in the concentration camps. And I want to read you this definition of cultural trauma, because I tried to memorize it, but it's way too long. Members of a collectivity, which would be the gay community, feel they have been subjected to a horrific event or events that leave indelible marks upon their group consciousness, changing their future identity in fundamental and irrevocable ways. This includes atrocities such as ethnic cleansing, slavery, and genocide. And I would argue, based on the consistent traumatic cultural experiences of men in the gay community, that is carried with us. It may not be passed down genetically, but it is passed down through stories, through video, through books, through our gay brothers and sisters who are older than us. So it really is passed down. And so my sense is that as a cultural experience, the gay community, the gay male community, has that trauma experience in them somewhere. So we've got a couple of things that I think do play into the cultural trauma, because all of these things impacted our culture profoundly. The concentration camps, the assassination of Harvey Milk, we saw ourselves out and political and powerful, and all of a sudden some jerk shoots Harvey Milk, kills him, and Mayor Moscone. Do you know what the defense he used was? Who remembers this? The Twinkie defense, which was really, I was messed up, I was high on sugar, and guess what happened? He got off. And basically the gay panic defense was used in the Matthew Shepard, which is he was coming on to us. So of course we had to murder him. So AIDS, obviously, the AIDS epidemic, whether you lived through it or have heard about it, it is imprinted in your psyche. Who here lived through in the 80s and 90s, right? Whether you're gay or not, do you get the concept of how traumatic that was? Basically a whole culture being decimated. Defense of Marriage Act, you are not entitled as a human being to love somebody else. You are less than. And it's not slavery, but it's basically saying you're one whatever a person. You can have lots of things, but not this one thing that everyone else gets. The Matthew Shepard murder, again, such a visual image of homophobia and violence towards the gay community. Don't ask, don't tell. Think about that. Don't ask, don't tell. Just shut your mouth, right? And again, the Pulse nightclub shooting. And I say that because bars and clubs and restaurants and wherever else are places, certainly in the old days, where gay men and women would come together to feel safe and to congregate. And this is 2016, 48 people murdered and 49 wounded. And if any of you have heard those tapes of the people trapped in the nightclub, I suggest you do, only because talking about PTSD, when you're looking at PTSD in people, this is a really great example of profound PTSD. I had a friend who has a client who was at the shooting in Vegas, and her boyfriend fell on top of her to save her life, and he died. But this concept of profound PTSD, even if you don't get shot witnessing something that violent, again, I'm talking about in the cultural sense. So complex trauma. Someone here must know what complex trauma is. Anyone want to throw a word or two out there? What are elements of complex trauma? What kind of abuse? Physical, psychological, emotional, neglect. But it's that there's a consistent, ongoing intersection of all of these traumatic experiences. And I'm going to read it so you hear it. Early childhood exposure to multiple traumatic events, often of an invasive interpersonal nature over an extended period of time, severe and pervasive, they can disrupt many aspects of an individual's development, positive sense of self, and the ease with which to form a secure attachment bond. Why do you think complex trauma beyond some of the stuff we'll look at might be experienced? What might be the complex trauma for a child who a parent or parents realize is gay? What might those parents say or do? Abandonment.
The father cannot handle that.
Father can't handle, mother can't handle, calling their kid a sissy. I had one parent, one of my clients, his father said to him, "Can you stop laughing so gay?" He was 7 years old, right? So not only did his parents beat him for just who he was, they shamed him for his sexuality before he knew what his sexuality was. And that's what I'm talking about, this sort of internal experience of shame. He wasn't born with shame. I do believe babies are born perfect. Sorry, I just do. There may be physical stuff, but we're pretty much, good folk. So this is the way in which the gay men are traumatized as children. Not to say that trauma doesn't continue into adulthood, but looking at complex trauma, here are a couple of statistics. Gay men and sexual trauma. This was a British report, and that's why they use the word homosexual. I love it. 46% of gay men, in contrast to 7% of the heterosexual men, reported molestation. 37% were encouraged to have sex before the age of 19 with an older or more powerful partner. So I don't want to make this necessarily about molestation or pedophilia, the concept of power. 94 with men. The median age of the participant at first contact was 10. Median difference was 11. That is pedophilia. But again, we're talking about trauma here. 51% involved the use of force, and 33% involved anal sex, most of which was not requested, right, which is invasive. So if we're looking at sexual trauma, which is one of the traumas, but we've just talked about emotional and psychological trauma, that's going to feed into how you see sex and sexuality. Power dynamics, safety, shame, lack of agency in how we talk about and experience sex and sexuality. We're now doing much more research on gay youth. You're hearing about a lot of organizations that are anti-bullying campaigns. Many schools are tracking and doing research on what gay youth are experiencing. While we've made a lot of progress and kids are coming out younger and younger, that does not mean everyone's gung-ho about it. And we are a flyover country. It's not just California and Chicago, I'm not going to use all the same, and wherever else in New York. This is happening. 13% were physically assaulted in the past year. 13%. That's more than 1 out of 10 kids. 48 students experienced electronic harassment, cyberbullying. Nice and safe to do that to somebody else. You've seen a couple of stories about young boys who were cyberbullied and committed suicide, or committed suicide because they were gay and weren't being supported. That's still happening. 59 were sexually harassed, right? Touching, saying sexual things about you, again, very shaming. And 63% of the students who reported an incident said the school staff did nothing. So what does that tell you about a sense of safety? None. None. Or it's safe and then it's not safe. So you have this insecure, and we'll talk about attachment, trust in that you are going to be safe in the world, that you're going to be taken care of and validated. This is not just not bad things are going to happen to you. What good things are happening to you because you're gay? And a gay man. So stigmatization, discrimination. This is a gentleman who committed suicide. My pain is not caused because I am gay. My pain was caused by how I was treated because I am gay. Okay? So stigmatization, I want to, again, read something because it's an interesting. In ancient Greece, a stigma was a brand burned into a slave or a criminal's skin to symbolize disgrace. In the 1500s, the word stigmatize meant literally to brand or to tattoo. Nowadays, stigmatize is to shame or to brand someone as defective, right? The stigmatization. So how can this happen? How might someone be stigmatized or discriminated against? What might someone might out you? Someone might call you a fag. Someone might say because you're gay, you don't get to be part of our church, be part of our cultural community. Family turning their back, stigmatization, and it's not just right when you come out. Coming out, as you all know who know about gay people, is not just a finite process. Gay men, gay women, I'll say LGBT people, are always coming out. Whether it's in the workplace, I just started a new job and I decide, can I say husband? Is this a safe place to do it? I shouldn't, and that's still, I'm pretty much out, you probably can tell. but I still have to think about that. The immediate impact can be these kind of experiences, these kinds of stigma. But still, long-term impact, income, employment, housing. If you don't think that there are people still out there who look at if a man who is more flamboyant comes in for a job interview and there's someone who seems straighter, even if they're both gay, I will say some people, not everybody, will hire the person they're more comfortable with. Okay? And if you, by the way, if you disagree with anything, raise your hands. Okay? Poor mental health and poor coping skills. That's not to say that gay men are diseased, but because of all of this kind of trauma, they're going to experience higher levels, and the research shows this, of mental health issues. Instability in relationships. If you're told that what you want to do or who you want to be with is somehow corrupt or wrong, again, that internalized message is going to make it difficult for you sometimes to find what a healthy relationship looks like, or to tolerate intimacy, to feel that you're worthy of intimacy. And this is where we'll talk about the conceptualization. Hypervigilance and increased stress. I can relate to this. Why do you think gay men and gay women experience a sense of hypervigilance and increased stress, particularly hypervigilance?
Well, it seems to me that they need to protect themselves. They've always felt they needed to protect themselves.
Exactly. If you are gay and you are constantly watching to see if someone's going to figure you out, clock you, how can you not be anxious? You know, I grew up with lots of siblings and parents, not lots too, and Catholic family, love my family, they're great, but I was the gay kid. And I've always realized I had to be careful. Don't look too long at that man. Don't make your voice sound too gay, which I don't know if that worked. Don't laugh a certain way. So if you think the system becomes programmed for hypervigilance, whether you know it or not, whether it's conscious or not, your system is often in a hyper-aroused state. It's upregulated, right? So that's also part of what we do in treatment. Internalized homophobia. This is introjection that results in maladaptive strategies. You take in the message of society and you say they're right. Now, is internalized homophobia always conscious? No. It plays out in many, many different ways. I don't know anyone who's gay who doesn't have some level of internalized homophobia. I don't think it's possible because the messages are coming at you still all the time. It's like, I can't be Teflon all the time. Something's going to get through into my system. There was a study done in Australia. It wasn't a huge population, but it was just the corollary between shame, self-esteem, internalized homophobia, and shame. So you can imagine that as the internalized homophobia went up, so did the shame, and this was a very simple line, as you can see. And as the self-esteem went up, if the shame went up, the internalized homophobia also went up. So you just had it, whether it's shame starting you to internalize homophobia or internalized homophobia leading to shame. You kind of got it both ways. So this is something I think is really important to talk about, and I don't know if it's always talked about. Gay men shame each other. They shame each other in multiple ways, whether it's overt or covert. Sexual behaviors and positions, top, bottom, oral, not oral, right? What position do you play? There's that sort of still, I believe, a very specific belief and bias in many people about what it means to be a bottom versus a top, right? And there are many ways to argue about which is more powerful, but again, this is really about how do we shame each other. Bathhouses and sex clubs, when I talk about that, not that they're necessarily shameful things, but if you're someone who goes to a bathhouse and you happen to mention it, someone looks at you like you're a pig, right? How dare you do that? Healthy sexuality may be for you. I like to go to sex clubs. It's not trauma related. I love sex with lots of people. Is it safe? Is it healthy? Great. But I would posit that a lot of people think sex clubs are kind of gross. Does anyone know what this is? Yep. Okay, who wants to tell me what it is? It's a legend on sexual behaviors, sexual positions. In the 70s particularly, men would wear handkerchiefs or bandanas in one pocket versus the other. Colors meant different kind of sexual behaviors. I'm not going to read all of them. You probably can't read them. Let's see. Red is fisting. Thank you. Left would be top. I like to fist. I'm glad this is going to be on YouTube. And right means I like to receive the fist. I think that's a better way of saying it. Yellow, I'm into water sports. My favorite one, though, is, I'm not supposed to move this far, but I have to, which is the flight attendant. Blue, Air Force color. pilot, flight attendant, that's who you are on the left, or if it's more on the right, that's what you're looking for, which I think is pretty cool. I mean, if you like flight attendants, okay? Ethnicity and race. I've worked with Latino and Asian gay men who, what do you think the perception often of Asian men is? Gay men. Passive, submissive, quiet. The gentleman I told you about whose parents told him to stop talking so gay is thin and Asian. And everyone assumes he's passive and a bottom. Neither. But he takes that in and struggles with how to present himself. African Americans, the way down low, a lot of down low men, which means they're having sex with men but nobody knows it. Or they're, also in the community, gay men who are African American and gay men who are Caucasian don't often mix together. And race, again, Latinos, they're perceived a certain way, white. All that kind of stuff does play out, whether it's subtle or overt. If you go to bars, you'll see it playing out. You'll see lots of white people. You might go to a bar, it's all Latino. And so there is this also segmentation. That's a whole other issue. What do I mean by non-traditional relationships?
Kink, polyamory.
Polyamory, non-monogamous. Absolutely, polyamory, you got 2 or 3, which is great if you can manage it. I have no idea how people do that. I can barely deal with 1. Open relationships. There is still lots of dialogue, lots of stigma. If you choose to have an open relationship, that means you can't be, both in the community and outside, you can't be faithful, you have to have sex with lots of people, there's something wrong with you. And that's still evolving, I think. There's still even conversation in the straight community about how could non-monogamy be helpful and powerful. But with polyamory, it's really more about, it's not sex, it's romantic and intimate relationships with more than one person. I knew what I call a throuple. It's easier to say. The primaries, the first 2 had been together 27 years. And at 7 years, they met another man who was only about 5 or 6 years older. And they've been together for, I can't do the math, decades. And how they do it, I don't know, but that's a non-traditional relationship, and that's another coming out. So if you think about that, this process of coming out is it's many-faceted. So what are some of the relationship challenges? Obviously, early childhood ruptures. That can come from a lot of different places, and ruptures can happen not just when you're a baby. Obviously, ruptures continue to happen, and if you are clocked, I use that term, by parents, or usually parents, there's going to be a rupture there. You're not going to trust. You're going to feel pushed away or rejected. Your understanding of how to be safe in a relationship right there is compromised, right? Developmental immaturity. If we look at Erikson's stages of development, sort of 12 to 15 is when you're really starting that process of individuation, discovering yourself as a human being, a sexual being. If you're in the closet, you're going to have a hard time developing healthy relationships, having sex for the first time. I mean, I hear from people who are closer to my age, my 20s were my teens. That's when I got to start dating. That's when I got to really start having sex, or have sex with pride. So think about that model of developmental immaturity when you're talking with gay male clients, and see how that might be playing out. The studies have shown that people who are gay who had attachment ruptures, and we know anyone with attachment ruptures, are going to have anxious and or avoidant attachment styles. Why wouldn't you? Right? Does that make sense? So this is something we talk a lot about here. Who knows what eroticized rage is besides Greg? I mean, it says it right here. Has anyone heard this term before? Okay. It's a way that unprocessed anger gets acted out through a person's sexuality. That does not mean violent sex necessarily, but it means that old wounds or even current wounds, it's very difficult to tolerate them and work through them with the other person or ourselves, so we're going to find some sort of sexual outlet for it. Is that right, Craig? Just because he's the one who taught me about it, actually. And so if you're thinking about old wounds, pain, anger about how you were treated or are treated as a gay man, if you're a gay man, you're going to understand the ways that this might play out. I'm not going to go through the 4 types because for time, I encourage you to learn more about it. You can find it online. I'll give you the 4. 1 is power and the restoration of self, or parody. Humiliation, vengeance, and retaliation. Perversion, and then obsession. Definitely look these up. It's really interesting, and I bet both with all of your clients and with yourselves, you will find that you have levels of eroticized rage. It's not, I don't think it's possible not to have it. And if you don't, see me after the break, as they say, or see when it's over, and tell me how you did it.
Can you say them real quick again?
Sure. Power, restoration of self, getting myself back. Humiliation, revenge, and retaliation. Is that the right order? Close enough. Perversion, and then obsession. Sure. So this is the model for sex addicts acting out, but I think this is sexual escapism for many people. So I just want to go through it quickly. So the issue around dependency needs, as kids, we want to have our needs met. We depend on usually our primary caregivers to give us care and support and love and safety and all those good things. But if at some point along the way, we haven't experienced all of them, and some needs get stimulated, like I need you to feel loved, and you don't trust you're going to feel loved, you might use sex as a way to get there. And again, this is a sex addiction model, but again, I think, it can work through here. So if I don't think my needs are going to be met, how am I going to get back a sense of control? How am I going to be able to take care of myself? For someone, they will probably go into a fantasy state. I want to have sex. Sex is going to make me feel better. How do I want to have sex? Picking however that's going to be. And this could be whatever you enjoy sexually. The ritual, which is the preparation for whatever behavior you're going to engage in. And we all have rituals when we're going on dates, take the shower, put on nice clothes. For someone who's acting out sexually, it could be going on an app, it could be setting up a date, whatever it is. The ritual, and the ritual can be very arousing for all of us, I think, the anticipation. Then we call it acting out. It should just be the sexual experience. You finally feel better. Many people, I think, who experience shame around sex are going to want to numb out. What are ways that people numb out? All of us numb out. TV. Eating. Online gaming, right? Drinking. Smoking. So this numbing out of the experience, when you don't feel good about it. I don't know that anyone in the world, not the world, has not had unhealthy sex. That has not had sex that comes not from a place, a generative place, but from anger or from shame or from hurt or wanting to have revenge, which would be eroticized rage. I shouldn't have done that. Shame, blame, guilt, which triggers that toxic shame. Yes?
Is this model similar or kind of the same used for like sexual anorexia?
That would be an acting in model. So that would look a little different, but yes, you would look at how it plays out differently. And that's a really good question, and we don't do enough talking about sexual anorexia, so thanks for bringing that up. Depression, self-hatred, again, these are not always conscious experiences. These, again, may be internal sort of emotional triggering feelings. And then, now I feel better. Now I can face the world again. So technology for all of us, gay or straight or bi or transgendered or queer, whatever it is, has really created a method by which shame can be promoted. I am not saying that any of these, gay porn, these hookup apps or apps, we'll call them social media apps, or online searching for sexual partners are bad inherently. But I want to do it, as they say, by the numbers, which is important. Okay, so Manhunt is an online, you can look for sexual partners. 1 million users in the US, 4 million users worldwide. Scruff, which is an app for meeting people, friendship, dating, also for anonymous or sex or what we call random play. 12 million users, that's gay, bi, trans, and queer. 12 million worldwide, okay? So these apps are powerful. This is my favorite, actually. So Pornhub is just one of the many, many porn sites, right? There are hundreds of them. Pornhub did a research. I don't know how many people they solicited, maybe 50,000 people for this survey. For 2016, and these are not discrete videos, almost 92 billion videos were viewed. 92 billion, and this is by one site. That would be 65 million porn videos? Yeah, videos watched per day. Now, some segment of the population is gay and are watching these videos. Nothing wrong with it, but this can lead to very, very much non-relational beliefs about relationships. It's me and a screen. You can't hurt me. I can choose what I like to watch. I don't have to talk to you about it. I don't have to feel rejected by you. Okay? So porn is an issue. Unless it's not an issue. What's the line, Greg? When is porn a problem?
It's not a problem until it is.
It's not a problem until it is. So again, pornography, thumbs up if you like it, as long as it's not a problem for you. But again, these apps do also promote possible shaming. You're trying to get someone to have sex with you, if that's what you want. You're too fat, you're too ugly, your penis is too small. So if you're seeking out some sort of affirmation and what you get back is negative. One of my clients, an African-American gay man who's very large, was on Grindr, and it was somebody he'd actually hooked up with it before. He sent, hey, let's get together again. The guy wrote back, you're ugly, you're fat, you're disgusting, don't ever call me again. First of all, clearly his memory was bad. Second, why? What's the value in doing that to somebody? Somebody that on some level, now we're not all so self-aware that, we're reinforcing shame, but shouldn't we on some level not shame someone again for who they are? Again, that's also part of the community, body shaming. That's a big thing, right? And that's where exercise anorexia comes from in the gay community, and use of steroids and other ways of looking good. Okay? Chemsex. This is also known as PNP, party and play, but they've really redefined it as chemsex to really understand the fusion between drugs and alcohol, but this is primarily drugs and sexual behavior. So you have here GHB, this is crystal meth, and this is something called mephedrone, which is new. Has anyone heard about mephedrone? It's actually big in the UK. I love everything in the UK. So GHB depresses the central nervous system. It's also known as the date rape drug. Mephedrone has both a meth and cocaine-like effect. So it has an effect like crystal, but it doesn't have a specific methamphetamine in it. Crystal is also known as Tina. And crystal is one of the most powerful, most used drugs for gay men, particularly for gay men who are sex addicts. Because it decreases inhibition, increases libido, decreases the ability to have rational thought, okay, and it's highly dissociative. So if you have shame about sex or you're uncomfortable with your sexuality, you are going to find a way, whether it's through something like a dissociative like G, or mephedrone or crystal, to get out of yourself. And that is not what we want to help our clients do. We want to help them get into themselves, get into their bodies, get into the intimate experience. So I just said this. It's also associated with a lot of risky sexual behaviors, unprotected sex, multiple partners in short periods of time. The one I've heard the most, someone had 15 partners in one night because he was high. And he's an addict. I mean, it wasn't a moral failing. But it was so much shame about his sex and sexuality. And certainly a risk to persons and property. I've had clients who would go to a Motel 6 and would come to robbed, beaten, shoes taken. So it's a real issue. I'm looking at this in the context of shame and sex rather than addiction and sex. So I want to be clear about that. Not everyone who uses crystal meth and has sex is a sex addict. Do I think it's a great drug? No, because the first time you use it, it's going to start to alter your neurochemistry, more so than something like cocaine or cigarettes, marijuana. So what's treatment look like? Finally, Dan, get to treatment. So understand the mental health issues. Suicidality, certainly self-harming behaviors. This is not just something like cutting. This could be anorexia. This could be alcohol, drug use, right? So self-harming is, what am I doing out of shame? What's the behavior? Again, I'm looking at through the shame lens. There are lots of lenses. This is my lens. Major depression, PTSD. There's a lot of research out there that shows, not enough research just on the gay community, but shows that with complex trauma, you are going to have elements of PTSD. Depression, anxiety are off the scales, and there is research on that. Bipolar disorder is found. I'm not sure why. And this is going to tweak some people's noses. I believe that a lot of gay men who deal with shame, attachment ruptures, a lot of they've gone through have borderline traits. Think about it, the pendulum, and love-addicted traits as well, love addiction, love avoidance. The desperate need, you're all great and saved my life and you're perfection, but one little thing, boom, the pendulum swings. I can't stand you, you're an asshole. Can I say that? Well, I'm saying it. you're a terrible person. It's very hard to even regulate that state. So there's not been a lot of research there, and I want to do some on it. So if you know some clients, I have to create a study. So what are the goals? Self-acceptance, identity, integration, healthy sexuality and sexual expression, and stable relationships. So let me go back. So self-acceptance, it's good that I'm gay, right? It's okay, right? And that's a daily thing for some people. It's going to take a lot of time for some people to do it. It's reinforcing that who you are, not what you are, on a fundamental level is good. Not just good, it's great. Identity integration. A lot of people, the out and proud, a lot of people have gone through, I certainly went through a development stage where it was all about being gay. Woohoo, I'm out, it's fantastic, da 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 da. Well, then I realized, wait a minute, there's a lot of other pieces of me, right? I'm a teacher, I'm a father, I have kids, I'm annoying, all these different elements. So I think our goal should be for our clients to figure out what does it mean to integrate their sexuality into the rest of their lives. Because, I like to say I'm a man who is gay. I'm not a gay man. It's hard just to say men who are gay every 15 seconds up here. But it's like I'm a person who, if I have an eating disorder, let's say. We're trying to externalize. Isn't that narrative therapy? Gay is not a problem, by the way, when I say narrative therapy. But putting the problem outside of yourself. Healthy sexuality, what does it mean to me? What kind of things do I really like? What kind of things do I like because they're great for me and some things that are bad for me? And stable relationships, again, this is not just romantic, intimate relationships. This is relationship with self, family members, friends, colleagues. This is about dealing with those attachment ruptures and helping people to learn how to be in complicated, difficult relationships, but consider them stable. I don't really know what stable means. So what are the objectives? Work on the eroticized rage, co-regulate, help clarify and internalize personal views of sex and sexuality, address family of origin issues that result in distorted, dysfunctional relationship patterns. And that's where all of these actually are working with shame. Again, we'll talk about that in a second. Yes, good question. So what are you going to do with eroticized rage? You got to teach people about this. Like you don't know about it. I didn't know about it until I started working here. Talk to them about it and put it in the context of let's talk where this happens to you. And why does it happen to you? And I'm talking about long-term therapy. This ain't no 6 sessions work, right? This is months and months and months. Assess from a non-heteronormative perspective. When you're thinking about the eroticized rage, there's a category called perversion. You got to make sure that you don't put on them your own bias, which we'll talk about, and you're not using language that can shame. There are a lot of assessment tools out there that now I think new ones are being done for sex addiction that are very heteronormative. And I think, who just did a new one? It wasn't Carnes, but someone's worked on one that is for gay men. But it's very tricky, because if you look at the questions, it can be very shaming and exclude people. So in terms of that, clarify and address their emotional drivers. What is it that causes me to act out sexually through an ER lens? Shame, anger, fear, right? Because anger is just a secondary emotion. Isn't that what someone taught me, Greg? Primary, behind anger is shame and pain and fear, right? So let's talk about that. Explore through the lens of the shame paradigm. Please use the paradigm if you like. So looking at it across the board, not just from that internalized homophobia or whatever else lens you usually use. And you're going to help them facilitate the self-soothing techniques so they don't act out. And that's also part of what we'll talk about when we call it co-regulation. Okay, so this is, Alex Katahakis just wrote a book called Sex Addiction as Affect Dysregulation. It's an amazing book. It's super complicated for me in neurobiology. She and I have talked about this. Co-regulation is, dyadic stance is affirmed by interpersonal neurobiology. So her research has showed that the brain changes in the way we relate to other people through a regulating dyadic experience. So what you're doing in therapy is you're not just looking at transference with the client experiencing, what's their affect like, right? What is happening for them somatically that might be telling you a story, right? What's their body doing? And that's still, it's exciting work. It's trickier work, I think, sometimes. I stay up in my head a lot. I'm like, what are they telling me? And I'm not paying attention to the fact that they just scrunch their shoulders up, right? You're going to track the transference, affect, and somatic cues in ourselves. What does my mouth look like when someone tells me something that really is shocking to me? Does it go? Am I aware of what's happening in my body? when I'm leaning forward, when I'm pulling back? Am I being very clear about what's happening to me? And so if I can regulate myself, I'm teaching the other person to regulate, and together, because we're all in relationship to each other, right, we're able to co-regulate. And there was something else I was going to say about that. Name and ruse, shame dynamics in the here and now. See the shame. See the shame happening as they're talking about something or something's happening in their body. Don't be afraid to address what's happening in the moment. You will get a lot of information there. Yeah?
So this is an approach of therapy, right?
Co-regulating, and it's gaining more and more and more traction because it's very much about the interpersonal relationship and interpersonal neurobiology. How our brains develop in relationship to another person is going to affect how we experience the world. Sex and sexuality, again, address the shame about it. That's going to be hard to dig up sometimes. People don't like to talk about sex. How many of you have clients who've never talked with you about their sex life? How many of clients where how many of you have never asked a client about their sex life? Well, good for you all. Process their experiences. Talk about when it was good and when it was bad, and why was it good and why was it bad. Go with them. Ask them what their fantasies are. I think that's a problem in relationships in general. Not asking what the fantasy is for fear of not being able to fulfill it or for fear of what it might look like. So give them the space. Remember, every fantasy doesn't become a reality, but explore their internal sexual life so that they can find a way to integrate not just the external experience of it, but their own happy secret world. We all have that part of us that should be secret. And if needed, send them to a 12-step program. If they're addictive behaviors, if there's compulsivity, you want them to get support. There's a way to build non-intimate relationships, a way to figure out what healthy sexuality means. So there's SAA, which is Sex Addicts Anonymous. There's SCA, which is Sexual Compulsives Anonymous. I think there are positive and negatives in both of those. For gay men going to SAA, you're certainly going to be able to form non-intimate sexual relationships with straight people because it's more straight men. In SCA, which can tend to have more gay men in it, it can be triggering. You can feel safe talking about sexual behaviors, and you can build healthy non-sexual relationships with other men. That it's not about peacocking and who's the hottest one in the room and what would it be like to date that person. Yes?
What about SLAA?
SLAW would be Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. You will learn about love addiction if you don't know about it. Super important. I think all of us have elements of love addiction and love avoidance. I think in all of our relationships we see that. And SLAW is often leans more towards the love addict, but people in SLAW also have issues around sex. So thank you for asking about that. There is SA, which you should never refer a gay client to. That's Sexaholics Anonymous, which is much more faith-based. The definition of sexual sobriety is only sex in a heterosexual marriage. No masturbation. Do not refer clients to SA unless you want to go back with all the therapy you've been doing, because it will send them spinning out of control. You will not see them again. Stable relationships, family of origin, relational patterns. Look at those patterns in relationships in their trauma. One of my favorite things is to do a genogram with our clients. I learned to do that here. Look at those relational experiences and see how they play out now. Process their relationship history. Not everyone's had terrible relationships forever. Can we look at our old relationships, figure out which needs were met? Do we know our needs? I always talk about my needs versus my wants. Needs are essential deal breakers. Wants are, it would be great to have someone who made $10 million a year. Right, but I need someone who's trustworthy. So are you helping them explore what that means? Utilize novel interventions. You need to learn about these before you use them. The trauma egg, which looks at their trauma historically in an egg, helps them to visualize it. The genogram, right? There's something called family constellation work, and I don't know how many people know about it. We're lucky enough to have someone here as a practitioner. She comes in to do it. It's very, very powerful. It's very experiential. It helps to reframe relationships with our family of origin. It's incredibly empowering. So think outside the box. Don't be afraid to refer, right? For a couple of sessions. They'll make so much progress in ways that we're just not trained to do. Highly recommend. What are your competencies? Certainly understand how best you can the experiences of the LGBT community. Don't just go online, talk to someone, right? Talk to a gay therapist, talk to gay friends. Understand it. You have to have a sense of your own sexual identity and beliefs about sexuality. If you're not stable in that, it's going to be very difficult for you to maintain not just the regulatory stance, regulate, but also your way of interpreting what they're doing. You have to be really careful about that. And you've got to be comfortable talking about alternative sexual behaviors. That, I think, is where self-regulation is really important. Because you're going to hear things, and if any of you work with sex addicts or in sex therapy, you hear some things that would be not amoral, right? Nothing really surprises me anymore. But you're going to hear things that you might not understand. Ask them about it. Oh, I don't really understand how BDSM works with this behavior. Help me understand it. Expressing curiosity does two things. You learn and you tell them they're important and that their sexual expression is important, which is what they need to know. Again, understand these evolving, it continues to evolve, sexuality, kink, and fetish. You don't have to agree with it, but you have to understand it and understand the role it plays in people's sex life. You are going to look at this also through a trauma lens. You don't have to do it overtly, but there are some people who engage in kink and fetish, particularly kink, where it does not come from a healthy place. So what's going on that I like to be tied up and beaten? I don't, but if I did, that would be okay. But is it because of trauma, or is it because it's part of my arousal template? And if it's because of trauma, can I work through it and still dig it? Right? We don't want to change everyone's sexual behaviors. We want to know, is there a way to integrate it, to make it what's the word? Something like that. Consistent with what we believe. There's a word for that. Family systems, religion and environment. Environment, where they came from. Cultural environment. Did they come from another country? Did they come from Kansas, which is a great place? Where did they come from? So what was sex and sexuality like there? Race, gender, culture, and socioeconomic status issues. Essential. You need to have the whole, if anyone, biopsychosocial. Think of the biopsychosocial we learned or the psychosocial assessment, and all those elements must feed into the way you treat a gay male client. Not saying it doesn't. Oh, my favorite, transference. So what's happening in the room? Are you being idealized because you're the one who's going to save them? Or if they know you're gay, are you the perfect gay man? Right? What's his life like not outside of here? Seduction, sexualization. If you're a gay man working with a gay client, or a woman working with a gay male client, that can come up. I've had it come up with heterosexual clients and then gay clients, and you have to name it. If you don't name it, then they're not going to trust you, or it may not be overt, so they need to know about it. If sexualization is the way they connect with people, you're really going to want to help them understand that. Be careful what you say. You may say something that seems completely innocuous, but because some people are wired to feel rejected and angry, it's very tricky. And again, this goes across all therapy experiences, but I look at it here. Distrust. No one's going to be able to help me. You don't really understand. Particularly if you're heterosexual or a woman, you might get that a lot. Right? They want to believe you, but they're not. And fear of abandonment. Clients who become very, very dependent on you. Incredibly dependent. Okay. I almost did this right. What are your countertransference? We've talked about the belief. Bias based on privilege, inherent power, and inequity. This particularly was a deal for me with my African-American gay client. Because the strata in the gay community, as probably in the heterosexual community, people fall at different levels. And this guy was poor, African-American, very large, and gay. And I'm this sort of, white guy, have a job, making money as a therapist. He knows what he pays me, all that other stuff. You don't name it in the room. We named it. We had to talk about it. Then you're going to have issues, I think. Body language, that's part of the regulation, co-regulating, regulatory affect. Self-disclosure. It's not bad to disclose something, right? We always have to figure out what's going to help the client in terms of, if we're gay, of our own sexual experiences. Not necessarily sexual experiences, but our experiences of relationships. I wear a wedding ring. If a client asks me if I'm married to a man and he's gay, what am I going to say? Why do you want to know that? He wants to know it because he wants to know if relationships could be possible. Frustration with progress. I speak from, again, I have a client I've worked with for 2 years who still doesn't want to come out. What, am I going to force him? I mean, when people have experienced being outed. How terrible is that? So as a therapist, I'm like, you need to come out right now. Or 3 months, you're going to have to do this. And then validating versus colluding. How am I supporting their behaviors, or whether it's coming out or their sexual behaviors? Am I validating their experience? I get that. Or am I colluding with them because I don't want to hurt them? Again, that's across the board with our clients, but I think collusion is very tricky. This is where we want to get. We want our clients to feel this for themselves, feel this from other people. And, you know, we all want this, but I think when I'm looking at this in terms of my work, if I were to give each of them a word cloud, maybe I should, this is where I want them to walk away from. Okay, I did it in 228, 227. Any questions? I mean, I have my cards here, and Center for Healthy Sex is on there. Any questions that I can answer right now? Yes, Alejandra.
I've experienced this with a couple of my clients that if I do a little psychoeducation about internalized shame or homophobia and all that stuff, sometimes the reaction is, that's not me.
Right.
I'm very prideful. How do you work with that in the room?
I don't name it. I don't use that language unless I really feel that they can take it in. I just work with what it is, what it means. You know, ask questions about what is, you know, where they might feel that they experience rejection. So know that, you know, use the definition, but don't use the definition with them.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
I stopped doing it because it wasn't.
It's hard. I think it's because then it can become pathologizing. Oh, you have internalized homophobia, right? Or you have gay shame, or whatever else it is. Good for you. Another question. Wow. Well, anyway, thank you all for being here. Thanks for listening to me. You have the slides. My email is somewhere. It's dan@centerforhealthysex.com, so it's not real tricky. Oh, it's up there too. Happy to consult, happy to talk, happy to give feedback. And again, thank you, and good luck with your clients in school and life. Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you.